Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast, episode 257. I'm your host, Kim Newlove. My guest today is Dr. Justin Cole. He is the host of DISRxUPT Podcast. This is the third episode in my Pharmacist Podcasters series. If you're new to this series, welcome. In this series, my guests are all pharmacist podcasters, and they all talk about their podcasts. Specifically, why they started their podcast, who their audience is, what's in it for their audience, why should someone listen, what they as a host get out of podcasting, what they want their audience to do with the information from their podcast once they have listened, where you can find the podcast, advice for new podcasters, and sometimes podguesters, and more. Links for the first two episodes in this series are in the show notes, which you can find at thepharmacistvoice.com. thepharmacistvoice.com. Click on the podcast tab and find episode 257. The purpose of this series is to inspire you to use your voice, whether you're a podcast host or a podcast guest. If you're a pharmacist who's interested in podcasting, this series is for you. And if you're interested in starting a podcast and you need some help, I can help you. I teach a self-paced podcast planning course for pharmacy professionals, and I'm also available online to coach one-on-one with you. You can find a link to that online course on my website, which is thepharmacistvoice.com. You're going to want to click on the store tab on thepharmacistvoice.com, or if you want to just contact me about private coaching, use the contact form on my website. Again, that's thepharmacistvoice.com. Now, at this time, I'll tell you a little bit more about my guest, then we'll move on to the interview. Justin Cole, PharmD, is a pharmacist, teacher, innovator, husband, and father of 3 wonderful kids. He currently serves as chair and associate professor of pharmacy practice at the Cedarville University School of Pharmacy in Southwestern Ohio. He is also the founding director of the Cedarville University Center for Pharmacy Innovation and host of DISRxUPT Podcast, the center's podcast. He has nearly 2 decades of experience in pediatric pharmacy practice, education, and healthcare innovation. Dr. Cole has been recognized by Cedarville University as the School of Pharmacy's Preceptor of Distinction in 2016, Distinguished Pharmacy Faculty Member in 2022, and the university's Faculty Innovator of the Year in 2023. He was also awarded the inaugural Award for Excellence in Teaching in Pediatric Pharmacy from the American Association of Colleges of Pharmacy in 2021. Dr. Cole is an active member of the Pediatric Pharmacy Association and the American Society of Health System Pharmacists. He has authored and co-authored numerous papers and publications, including Ethics in Pharmacy Practice, a Practical Guide. Among other things, he enjoys hiking, backpacking, hunting, backyard gardening, serving in his church, and enjoying sports with his family. Without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Justin Cole. Hi, Justin. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast. How are you?
Hey, good morning, Kim. I am doing really well. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on yours on the DISRxUPT Podcast, episode 29. Great episode to start with, by the way.
Completely agree. Yeah, go listen to our episode 29.
Yes. Well, today I'm going to have you talk about DISRxUPT Podcast, why you started the podcast, who your audience is, and so much more. Let's dive in. Why did you start the DISRxUPT Podcast?
Well, Kim, to get to answering your question, I think I have to go back a bit and tell about my story and interaction with podcasting in general. So for years, I was nothing but a consumer of podcasts. I would listen to podcasts on different hobbies that I had, maybe sports, sometimes theology and Christian living, and all kinds of things, pharmacy-related podcasts as well. But it wasn't until the School of Pharmacy here at Cedarville University established the Center for Pharmacy Innovation that I thought, you know what, there's something meaningful that I'd like to contribute to this conversation and podcasting. So when that was founded, the Center for Pharmacy Innovation here about 5 years ago, we started to strategize, how do we, number one, get the message out about our mission and vision of the center? Number two, establish key partnerships that will help to really jumpstart the center. And number three, simply inspire other people to get involved in pharmacy innovation and practice transformation. And one of those ideas was, hey, why don't we jump into this podcasting thing? So at the time, we had two of our students that were hired as student innovators in the center. And I gave them a very shoestring budget to work off of. We had some equipment from some other things we had done here at the School of Pharmacy at Cedarville. And they did a fantastic job pulling together the software, the hardware, the mics, all the things that we would need to get started with the podcast. We partnered also with some people here on campus who were already in the podcasting space and being really successful with that. And so thus DISRUPT was born. And before we talk about it anymore, I need to be very careful to make sure you know how to spell DISRUPT. It is actually DISRxUPT. So the X is silent like we have in so many other pharmacy related things. So we had to riff off of the pharmacy piece there. But yeah, that's kind of the story of how we got the podcast up and running.
Thanks for sharing that. Now it's DISRUPT Podcast, not the DISRUPT Podcast, right? So when people search for it, just start with the letter D, right?
That's exactly right.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. As you have started this podcast, you probably had an audience in mind of who you wanted to reach. Can you tell me, who did you want to reach and who are you actually reaching?
Yeah. So when we started the podcast, we had a couple of different groups in mind. The first was we wanted our students to listen in. So we wanted the podcast to be interesting and something that they would find valuable to supplement what they're learning in school beyond just the names of the drugs and their mechanisms of action and where they fit in clinical practice, all of those types of things. So that was the first audience that we had in mind. The second, though, was Kim, you and I would probably agree, pharmacists tend to be very type A personalities, right? We are very good at having a recipe or a protocol and following that to a T. Sometimes, though, we're not really great about thinking outside of the box. But as I talk with pharmacy leaders on our podcast and through some other venues, what I'm finding is that what pharmacy needs today are problem solvers. We need people who are willing to ask hard questions, to observe what's going on, look for opportunities for improvement, come up with ideas, and then try them. And so the secondary audience of our podcast, and really I would say it's kind of become the primary, are people who are out in pharmacy practice and in other healthcare settings who are really looking to make a difference and change things that are good for the patients that we serve at the end of the day. So those are our two primary audiences, both students or aspiring pharmacists, but also currently practicing pharmacists who are looking for that inspiration or maybe just simply a spark of an idea to go and change the paradigm of care wherever they practice.
Justin, I don't know about you, but when I started my podcast, The Pharmacist's Voice, I had this audience in mind, and it ended up being broader than what I originally intended. And one way that I knew who my audience was is that I have all these social media channels and I have a contact form on my website. When I put that stuff out there, those opportunities for people to direct message me, email me, contact me, etc., I found that there's people listening all over the world, and it's more than just pharmacy people. Who has contacted you? I'm just curious, what kind of feedback are you getting?
Yeah, we've found the exact same thing. One of the biggest surprises for me, as you've already mentioned, are how many international listeners will tune into podcasts. A lot of people are interested in what's going on here in the United States. And it's kind of ironic when you think about it. Cedarville University sits in the middle of cornfields in the Midwest. Like we are as Ohio as you can get, right? We've got about a 10 to 15 minute drive to any major highway, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And yet we have listeners all over the United States and now all over the world. I think the last I checked, we were up over 50 different countries that we've had listeners from. So I would fully agree with you. What you have in mind in terms of your reach, which for us was, we never thought outside of the US, ends up being so much greater than your plan. And that's one of the really cool things about podcasting. Your voice goes much further than other media platforms in many cases.
Totally agree. I have had people request certain content. And one of the things that they asked is, how do I get a job in pharmacy in the United States? Now, I know I don't have any responsibility to answer that question, but why not? So I took that and I turned it into a podcast episode. That was pretty cool. Has anyone ever asked to be on your podcast and then they've ended up on the podcast?
We certainly have had people reach out to us. I think a lot of the networking that have brought guests to us has been through LinkedIn. It's a great platform to share podcasting and connect with people, especially when you talk about pharmacy, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So we've had a number of people where connections have been made with us regarding the work they're doing. And then that translates into a conversation about, hey, we have a podcast. Is that something you'd be interested in coming on? And so one of those relationships that I would highlight is Perfecting Peds. So Jenna Quinn is in New Jersey, and we connected just based on the work that she's doing in pharmacy innovation and entrepreneurship. And that translated into a conversation about, hey, let's get your voice out further. Let's have you on the podcast. And so she's one that comes to mind that we've connected with, and then that's led to an opportunity for her to come on the podcast.
Very nice. There's all kinds of networking and relationship building that can come out of podcasting, right?
Oh, absolutely. I have found that podcasting has exponentially increased the success I have in networking. There are lots of ways to do it, right? You can go to conferences that are in person or virtual conferences and meet with people who have like interests or maybe those that you think would be helpful for you to know in your sphere of influence. You can network through LinkedIn and other social media platforms. You can just cold call people, right? But what I find is podcasting allows your voice to be heard, and often either you or a guest are going to say something that piques an interest from someone else. It might have only been one small snippet from your podcast, but that one thing that someone latches onto creates a desire to connect more about things. And that's for me been, I think, the most enjoyable part of podcasting related to the Center for Pharmacy Innovation. Many of our connections, the research we're doing with partners, has come from those who have heard our voice in podcasting, have reached out, and then we've developed a relationship. So if you're someone listening and you're thinking, oh, I don't know about this podcasting thing, is it even really going to benefit me? The answer is 100% yes. You will absolutely have fun in the process, but you'll also make connections that you would have otherwise never made.
I call that social capital.
Yep, great term.
Yeah. I like the inspiration, the intentional inspiration behind what you're doing there. That you're definitely inspiring your audience. If you could explain, though, what else is in it for your audience to listen to the podcast, what else would that be?
So when we think about the content we put on our podcast, we want it to, number one, be educational. We want people who are listening to see what new things are happening in the pharmacy space. How are people translating ideas to real products or services? And then how are those products and services becoming new business models or new practice models later on? So we want them to learn on our podcast about this idea of entrepreneurship and innovation and just knowing what's new in pharmacy practice. But secondly, and for me, this is the most fun part of the podcasting, aside from networking, I want our listeners to be inspired to take an idea that they might have, to be willing to talk about it with others. That's a big first step when you have an idea. And then to even consider taking some risks to try to prototype something or just try it and see what happens. So my hope is in telling the story of innovators and entrepreneurs, including like yourself, we help others to want to take a step not be afraid to take a risk and do it themselves. Because at the end of the day, the only way we are going to improve and change our broken health system is to try new ideas. And if we are too scared of that, whether that's because of the risks that are there or what people will think or will it fail, we are actually not only hindering ourselves, but possibly the advancement of the care of the people that brought us into pharmacy in the first place as our inspiration. Again, most of us go into pharmacy because we want to help people, right? At least as part of that reason. And so let's realize that failing to act on an idea is sometimes failing our patients. And I know that might be a little bit of a bold statement to make, but we've got to be the change we want to see happen. So let's do it. So inspiration is a big part of that. So I think besides education, information, the last would be just bringing a general awareness of people that you should be connected with or follow. If you want to know who to partner with for an idea you have, or who to contact for insight on something that you're thinking about doing, or maybe it's a contact for a next job or opportunity. We want podcasting, and particularly our podcast, to be a source of information for those things.
I love that answer. I feel like you're identifying thought leaders in the pharmacy realm. You are inspiring your listeners to innovate. And might I even say that you're also inviting them to disrupt the way that things are right now done? What would you like to say about the word disrupt?
Yeah, that's exactly what we want to happen. The word disrupt, I think a lot of times it can have just an edge of negative connotation, at least for some people, where, all right, those who are disruptive are a little bit edgy, they sometimes are willing to do things that are maybe considered on the outer skirts of moral or ethical or whatever. But I think that's a little bit of an unfair use of the term, especially in business these days. What we simply want to communicate with disrupt is doing something different than the status quo. That's the heart of innovation. Anytime we face a problem, the real way to attack it is not to just simply dissect it. That's part of it. But true problems are all idea problems. We need to surround the problems with ideas. And that's at the heart of disruption as well. We see a problem, we surround it with ideas until one bubbles up to the top. And then we see what we can do to change it. So for me, it's changing the status quo to better what's around us.
Love it. Disruption can be a good thing.
It can. That's right.
I love what's in it for the audience. Again, the thought leaders, identifying thought leaders, bringing their ideas to your audience, and inspiring people to innovate and disrupt in a good way. Love it. Now, what is it that you, as the host or the university, Cedarville University, get out of having a podcast?
So there are probably more benefits to us than I ever realized in podcasting. As I've mentioned, one of the big benefits simply is that people know who we are at Cedarville University and what we're doing. Again, I mentioned that Cedarville is in the middle of the cornfields of Southwest Ohio, and otherwise, there are a lot of people that probably wouldn't hear about Cedarville University. It would never be on their radar. But podcasting brings a general awareness of the university, the School of Pharmacy here, and also the Center for Pharmacy Innovation. And so I think that's a big part. It's almost like the marketing aspect of a podcast that maybe that's not your intention, but it's a natural outworking of podcasting. I think a second thing is it's helped us connect with partners and people who really are wanting to accelerate change in healthcare. So there are a number of partnerships with others that are in this space. And we've had projects where we're collaborating on a new device that maybe we could bring to market, or helping them to scale new services, or in other cases, it might be helping them to write a grant or research proposal that will really launch what they're trying to do. So it has generated partnerships for us as well. My hope, too, is that as we increase awareness of Cedarville University and the School of Pharmacy, that it simply inspires people who maybe are on the fringes of going into healthcare or into pharmacy specifically to think about it more. We need fantastic people who want to serve others, but also change in a good way how we serve others well. We need great physicians right now. We need great pharmacists right now with that mentality. We need PAs and nurse practitioners and athletic trainers, and we can keep going on and on and on, right? But I think that's been another benefit for us, is that we're trying to inspire people to say, hey, I can make a difference in healthcare. So let me pursue that. So those would probably be the biggest benefits to us that come to mind through podcasting.
What I hear you saying is branding and marketing for sure. Again, getting your name out there, kind of controlling the narrative of what can be said about Cedarville University's Center for Pharmacy Innovation. Like, this is a good place to be. We want to attract people who are innovators. That's great. But then I hear networking and relationship building in your answer as well, which I am 100% on the same page with you about what a podcast can do for someone. Branding, marketing, networking, relationship building. And you also have that relationship with your audience. There might be some future student out there listening who's thinking, if these people think this way, this is where I want to be.
Absolutely. And I will say, Kim, one of the things we do with our podcast episodes, especially if there are those that are thinking about pharmacy as a career, we'll actually send a blast through an email to some of those prospective students to say, hey, here, this gives you a little bit more insight into who we are and what makes us different. So feel free to take 30, 40 minutes of your time to listen in. And you're right, that's a great benefit that we get from podcasting.
Would you like to talk a little bit about this Center for Pharmacy Innovation and how it's not just for students, it can be for others?
Absolutely, yes. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about it. So, with our vision of transforming healthcare to improve the lives of others, we know that as a Center for Pharmacy Innovation, we're not going to do it alone, right? If we're really going to change the paradigm of care, we've got to partner with other people. One of the biggest benefits of podcasting, but then through the center, is that we're creating an awareness and creating relationships. So, for example, we are partnering with a health technology outfit in being an academic partner with them and helping them to pursue grant funding that we would do the research side of. So we have a number of those partnerships that we've been a part of. We also are creating right now a work study opportunity for our students with a pharma company that they can do right here from the comfort of the School of Pharmacy and our physical center here at the school. And they can do that while getting paid, not having to travel anywhere, and learning through that process by contributing to the work of another partner. So for me, that's really where we find the win-win-win of the center, right? We're looking for people who are in need of students and pharmacists who can do really fantastic work to accelerate what they're trying to do. The other win is we try to employ our students where they actually get paid as often as possible when they work for the center and in these relationships with partners. And then the win for us here at the center is often these partnerships help us to keep the lights on and the doors open, which is just it's something that we want to do forever here. But it also generates new partnerships. So it's kind of like that snowball effect. You get a couple going, and then others say, hey, I know this place that they were really helpful with this project. They actually helped us to publish our research when otherwise we wouldn't have gotten it published. Or we actually have Cedarville students working for our project, and they are knocking this stuff out of the park. So through the center, we, again, want to catalyze innovation in pharmacy. And we do that through leveraging our student workers who are fantastic, our research expertise among our faculty, and the partnerships that we're able to generate.
Nice, nice. I didn't know about the Center for Pharmacy Innovation until I met you. I'm glad that I have had the opportunity to meet you, learn more about it, and thank you for talking about it here on my podcast today, because you might just inspire somebody to develop a relationship with you and, do some business with you or Maybe even send some future students your way. You never know.
Absolutely. Yep. And we would welcome all of those things. Kim, I would also mention one of the other things that we've seen happen with our DISRupt podcast through the center is that as you continue to develop the podcast, you often get an opportunity to go and talk to other podcasters on theirs. And that, what we have found, is where the listenership really starts to grow. So first, I appreciate you letting me come on to talk to you today. But I've also had the opportunity to be on a number of other podcasts and actually start to host another pediatrics podcast with a friend of mine. So that's another way to kind of catalyze your listenership. Talking with other podcasters allows you to expand that network pretty quickly.
Congratulations on all that relationship development that you've found in podcasting, not just on my podcast and your podcast, but other podcasts as well. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
Now, we did already talk about what the audience gets out of the podcast, but thinking about once they listen to your podcast episodes, what do you want your audience to do with that information?
That's a great question, Kim. And I think it kind of goes back to the heart of why we even podcast. So for me, I want them to, number one, go and look at the world around them a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is I want them to look for those little pinch points or those little annoying things in their day or in their workplace that they're like, wow, you know what, if I change that, that would make a big difference. Or maybe it's looking for a grander problem that you'd like to solve. I think that's the first step to innovation. We identify a problem worth solving, right? Secondly, I want our listeners to be inspired to then come up with as many ideas as possible to attack that problem. I'm a big believer in this idea of idea flow, where the best ideas don't just come from simply thinking of the first idea and trying to then eventually find a way to implement it. The best ideas happen when you go for quantity of ideas, not quality. What you find is the more ideas you generate, eventually that one that maybe is the moonshot, but is really the one that will change things, bubbles up to the top. So my hope is that after they identify a problem worth solving, they then attack it with ideas. And then lastly, I want them to be inspired to take risks and talk to people about that idea. Maybe even come up with a rudimentary prototype you can show someone. Have 10 cups of coffee with people, not at once, with 10 different people, right? To talk about your idea and get their feedback and say, hey, do you think this would work? How can I make the idea better? Is this something you think will change patient care? And do you think others will be interested in it? Who should I partner with? So you take that next step to do something about your idea and not just let it stay there. So at the end, if I had to summarize all of those things up with what I want our listeners to do with the podcast, my hope is, again, going back to that inspiration idea. We inspire them to find the problem, surround it with ideas, and take the next step to start implementing that problem and developing it so that it actually comes to fruition.
I am cheering you on so hard over here. I had to turn my mic off because I'm like, go, Justin, go. I love that.
Kim, I will also say that same thing applies to podcasting, okay? So
sure.
Why would you start a podcast? Well, first, you identify a need. There's a voice not being spoken in the podcasting world. Or maybe that need is there are voices, but it needs a different perspective, right? These same ideas all apply to podcasting. So be inspired to try that if that's something you guys are thinking about.
That reminds me of a quote. I think it was by Toni Morrison. Forgive me if I'm misquoting, but if there's a book out there that needs to be written, you need to be the one that writes it. If there's a podcast out there that needs to be created, then you have a responsibility to create that. If there is a problem that needs to be solved, you have a responsibility to start thinking about how to solve it. Get curious. Talk to other people, find out how they think. Maybe there's something in how they think that can disrupt in a good way, the way that you think, and help you move towards solving that problem. I'm so inspired by what you said. Thank you so much for your answer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's another thing about podcasting too. I find that I'm as jazzed up after doing the podcast as I hope our listeners are. And that's something we do intentionally try to infuse into the podcast. But for me, it's so natural. I am a learner. If you look at my strengths finder, and many of you may have done that in the past, one of my top two every time I do one of these things is learner. I just love being curious. And so let's do that, right? Let's be the ones that solve the problems, that get the voices out there. And again, at the end of the day, change what's happening around us.
Absolutely. And don't think that you have to be the one that solves it all by yourself. Collaborating is fantastic. And even if you're not the one that ultimately solves the problem, you can be part of the solution by just contributing. I used to think about idea theft all the time. I was so worried that people were going to steal my ideas. But if you have a passion about something, your passion will keep you going. Whereas that person who stole your idea, they don't have the passion in them to carry it across the finish line. That is why my company is the Pharmacist's Voice. There are very few people out there that want to leave a traditional clinical practice setting and use their voice professionally. I really value my voice and therefore I use it professionally. Not everybody wants to do that. So I should not have been concerned about idea theft because the passion's just not there. But for everyone listening, if there's something that you are passionate about or curious about, and there's a problem you want to solve, be inspired to solve it.
Yep. Echo every word, Kim. Great. Yeah. I couldn't agree anymore.
I believe my number one strength is learner as well. So I think we've got that in common.
Yes, absolutely. That'll take you a long way.
Absolutely. Getting curious about things. But you also have to be careful if you have the number 8 Enneagram character type, the personality type like I do. I want to pile on more and more. Like I'm curious about a lot of things. And I like a lot of input. I like a lot of ideas. So you have to know your limits as well. Be curious, but know your limits.
Yep. Kim, I think I'm the same way in that often your biggest strength can become an Achilles heel or a weakness when taken too far, right? So learning how to find those limits is an important part.
Words of caution. And again, I love the 10 cups of coffee comment. Thank you for sharing that. And I love that you said don't drink all 10 at the same time. If coffee is your Achilles heel, don't be drinking 10 cups of coffee at the same time. Great advice, Justin. Justin, where can my audience find DISRxUPT Podcast?
Our podcast can be found anywhere that you stream, really. So you can look on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher. We're all over the place. You also can visit the Cedarville University School of Pharmacy's website to learn a little bit more about who we are, and there are links to the podcast there. Our Center for Pharmacy Innovation website has some links. You can also subscribe to our RSS feed through a number of those platforms. And then lastly, we try to make sure that all of our podcasts are posted on our LinkedIn page. That's a major part of our networking. And so you can always go there to find those links to follow and learn a little bit more about what we're doing here at the center. We're actually going to feature all of our innovators here at the center here at the beginning of the year. So look for some posts about our student innovators and who they are, what they get to do here. I think it'll be a lot of fun. So those are the major places to go to learn about what we're doing. And again, it's spelled DISRxUPT, Disrupt.
Thank you for sharing that. I listen to you on Apple Podcasts, and I follow your LinkedIn page for the Center for Pharmacy Innovation. And I'm always seeing new episodes come up. Once a month, I believe, is when you publish, right?
That's right. Yep. We're on a once a month schedule here. We may change that. We've been inspired by yourself and others to think about some different things. So we're thinking about that. Also, the other podcast I'm involved with is the Pediatric Pharmacist Review on the Pharmacy Podcast Network. So if you're a peds person listening and you want to hear pharmacists talk about what's new in pediatrics, you can go there as well. It's a lot of fun. And I get to co-host that with Jenna Quinn, who I mentioned earlier in the podcast.
Very good. Congratulations. Well, you're really branching out.
It's, when you're having fun, like you said, it's hard to say no. So
Yes, and it's
yes.
okay to change your podcast recipe too. I tell people all the time, I help pharmacists who want to start podcasts, and I tell them, you start off with your recipe, but it's okay to change your recipe. Just let your audience know what's happening in case it's less instead of more.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and we've been inspired to think about that from your own podcast, where now you have added in pronunciation information about drugs. That was not, I'm sure, on your podcast radar when you started this whole thing. So that's exactly right.
Yes, that was not on my radar. In fact, I'm thinking in 2024, I'm thinking about only having for the year 2024 drug name pronunciations and pharmacist podcaster interviews with a little bit of seasonal updates mixed in and poisoning prevention and public health service commission corps officer interviews. I think I just want to make 2024 the year of the things that I really enjoy. And also, I don't know about you, Justin, but I look at my statistics, and if my audience really enjoys those drug name pronunciations and the certain podcast episodes I just mentioned, I think that's what I should focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. We've always got to be learning from that information. So that listenership and looking at the type of content you're putting out can be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, it's all for the audience. It's not for me necessarily to brand and market myself. I mean, I'm trying to fill a void for somebody. Somebody out there wants to hear me for some reason. And if I'm getting thousands of downloads on one or two particular episodes, I really need to stop and think, maybe I should be doing more of that, right? And that's why in 2024, I'm going to be doing more of the drug name pronunciations because I have such a global audience that really appreciates those. All right, Justin, this has been fun, but as we start to wrap this up, can you tell me what advice do you have for new podcasters?
So the first thing I would say is if you've got an inkling of an idea, go and talk to a couple people, right? Go back to those cups of coffee we've mentioned a couple times and see what their thoughts are. Ask people from different perspectives. Don't just get one perspective. Ask a number of people what they think. So that'd probably be a good place to start. Secondly, connect with someone who has done this. So you've got a great connection in Kim, who hosts this podcast, but there are lots of others that you can reach out to, and they can tell you all about their lessons learned, give you advice on how to get started. What technology should you use? What platforms or software should you use to record your podcast? How do you edit? There's so much you can learn from other people. So I would say be curious and learn from other people. Look for insights from those who are already in podcasting. And lastly, I would just say try it, right? I mean, what's at risk if it doesn't go the way that you thought, right? You can at least say, well, I gave that a try. But I think what you'll find is that there are a lot more people interested in what you have to say than you realize. So just get out there and try it. And Kim, before I forget, I do want to give a really big shout out to some of those people who were helpful for us. And namely, those have been students. So the students that we've had here in the center. So Matt Miracle is one of those. He's now graduated from our program, but he did a fantastic job figuring out how to do this podcasting thing for us. And then the other is Luke O'Brien. He's still a student here at Cedarville, finishing up his P3 year right now. But he does our editing in the background, troubleshooting when I do things wrong on the podcast, including figuring out our microphones and other things. They have been two really key people. They're younger than me naturally, but they understand technology and they understand what listeners want to hear too. So don't be afraid to partner with other people who can help you be successful.
All great advice. I love how you give credit to the people who are part of your team. Sometimes it takes a team, and I certainly have outsourced certain things to other people. I didn't know how to do audio engineering, so I outsourced my learning to Don Barnes, who taught me Studio One. I had to watch an online course. There have been times where I had him set up a template for me. I have done a lot of my recording, editing, and producing all by myself, pretty much all of it. But if I didn't know how to do it in the first place, I would be nowhere. So Thank God for the people who help us with the things we don't know how to do. Our zone of genius is not always everything. We can't know everything.
Yeah, you are so right about that. And again, I have fun with all this stuff, but a lot of the really enjoyable pieces of podcasting are going home and remembering the conversations we've had with people and the interactions. And so podcasting can be that for you. And don't hesitate to reach out to other people and let them be a part of what you're doing.
Love it. Great advice. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you so much for being here on the Pharmacist Voice podcast to share how you use your voice as a pharmacist podcaster. Take care and enjoy the holidays.
Thanks for the opportunity, Kim.
My pleasure. Thanks again to Dr. Justin Cole for being my guest today on episode 257 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. As a recap, today we heard Justin talk about why he started his podcast, who his audience is, what the audience will get out of listening to DISRxUPT Podcast, what's in it for him as a host and Cedarville University's Center for Pharmacy Innovation, what he wants his audience to do with the information after listening to the episodes, and advice for pharmacist podcasters. There were a lot of really cool sidebar conversations in there as well, as you can tell, and I must say that I really enjoyed our conversation. It was a pleasure to interview Dr. Justin Cole on my podcast just 3 months after he had me on his in September of 2023. Did we inspire you to use your voice as a podcast host or a podcast guest too? I sure hope so. Thank you for listening to episode 257 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you'll find a link to DISRxUPT Podcast and episode 29 of DISRxUPT Podcast featuring me, LinkedIn links for Dr. Justin Cole as an individual, and Cedarville University's Center for Pharmacy Innovation. You'll also find a link to my podcast planning course for pharmacy professionals, my social media links, and more. If you know someone who might like this episode, maybe they want to be a podcaster or a podcast guest, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. I'll be back next Friday, January 5th, with a drug name pronunciation episode. Thanks again for listening today. I'll talk to you next Friday.